Good afternoon and good morning for some of you. Thank you for attending this webinar. It's Ask the Coaches Part 2, and I want to thank you again for being here with us to get your most troubling questions answered. My name is Linda Ginac, and I am the CEO of TalentGuard. And I have with me today Betty DiMaria. She is the CEO of RS Performance, and she is going to be answering half of the questions, and I will be answering the other half of the questions. Just a couple of notes before we get started. This presentation will be available with the recording for download a couple of hours after the webinar, and we will send that link out to you so that you can download it and then look at it for your pleasure at another time as well. And please feel free to chat us your questions, and we will answer those questions at the end of the presentation. We'll leave about 15 minutes for the topics of interest. So last time we started this presentation for Ask a Coach 1, we had about 8 different areas, and we had so many questions that we had to break it out into 2 groups. So today, this particular session is going to cover 4 areas. The first one being employee development. So how do we go about developing employees in the best way possible, regardless of your company size? Career pathing. We had lots of questions around how do you do career pathing if you have a tremendous amount of roles, and how do you do career pathing if your company is a flat organization. We're going to talk a little bit about the use of assessments with employees and what's the best practices around that. And then a brief couple of questions around talent management technology, and most of the questions revolved around how do you execute on technology when you don't have large budgets. So we're going to be able to answer those for you. To get started, I'm going to pass the reins over to Betty, and Betty's going to start with employee development. And so I'm going to go silent until the next slide.
Thank you, Linda. Hello, everyone. First, I want to thank TalentGuard for inviting me back as a guest speaker. I'm very impressed with TalentGuard's work, and I'm honored to be a part of it. So thank you, Linda. My first area is employee development. And the first question under employee development is how can we help managers become better at identifying development opportunities? Well, I think that keeping employee development on the front burner is key here. And this is hard to do, but let me offer a few suggestions. First, I'd say make sure that managers have regular conversations with their staff about professional development. I recommend putting a formal plan in place with each employee and updating that annually. And a lot of companies do that. But have your managers discuss it with their employees at least quarterly. Keep it in the forefront. At the quarterly reviews, make sure that the plan is still relevant, make sure the employee is engaged in it, and make sure that progress is being made. I've had success with this in the past by helping companies make this a part of their formal performance evaluation process and integrate it into that process. By doing that, the companies were able to hold managers and staff both accountable for development. Second, you can ask managers to look for development areas for their staff that align with the organization's current objectives. Have managers think about what their departments need to do to meet their goals, and then look for the potential in their staff to meet those demands. I have found that that makes it easier for managers to identify opportunities, that when they're looking at their own department goals and their own goals, they're more likely to identify opportunities for their staff. And everyone wins in that scenario, the employee, the manager, and of course the organization. Another idea you might want to try if your managers are struggling with this a bit is to have them work with other people on this. They can get advice from their HR departments. They can get advice from external coaches. If your company doesn't have those resources, or even if it does, you can also ask managers to work with each other on this. Often, a colleague will see potential in your staff that you might not see yourself. So it can help managers to realize that their peers are also looking for ways to develop their own staff and that they're not in this alone. So brainstorming on shared objectives of the company and staff potential of the organization can be an effective way for managers to work on employee development. My second question that was pre-submitted is how can we introduce an internal career coaching program to foster development? Okay, well, first you need coaches. So you can hire experienced coaches, either external or hire them into your company, or you can identify good internal candidates within your organization and train them to be coaches. Things you want to look for in coaches, some really important traits, are you want people who are able to listen without judgment, assess people as individuals, not as stereotypes, be very open, and of course be completely trustworthy and able to hold confidences. If you're training internal staff, you can put them through a program like TalentGuard's Professional Career Manager program. Also, many universities have some excellent coaching programs. If your organization can afford the time and the money to do that, Georgetown University, for example, has an outstanding program. Second, communicate clearly why you're introducing the coaching program in the first place. Make sure you use positive messages about coaching, things about development and growth, succession planning, best practices. Again, have a positive message. And explain how your organization expects to benefit from coaching specifically. The more specific you can be, the better. Are you doing this to make you more competitive, better prepared to launch a new product, able to retain key employees longer, key customers? Make sure you know why you're introducing the program, that your senior management is on board with that, and explain that to your staff. Last, I'd say be careful about who you select to go through the coaching. Personally, I believe that your biggest ROI, or return on investment, will come from coaching the staff who have the most potential and those who are already your star performers. Coaching can be used for remedial purposes, but if it is just that or perceived as just that within your organization, it can backfire on you. I worked with a company recently where we put every senior manager in a coaching engagement, regardless of their performance level or their experience. Then after a while, after 6 months or so, we assessed who was gaining from the coaching program and who wasn't. And we continued the program for those who were growing as a result of the coaching. And trust me, those people who weren't engaged and weren't growing from it were very relieved to be let out of the program. And those who were growing and were learning from it were very happy to have the benefit continue for them. So think about how you're going to select people. The next question is, how can we better align learning resources to specific employee gaps? That's a great question. First and foremost, you have to remember that people have different learning styles. Everyone won't learn the same way. Some people learn best by reading, others by listening to a lecture, some by watching videos, some by getting their hands on, doing the work, role-playing. So the first thing you want to do is find out how people learn best and which methods would be most effective for them. Most people will be able to tell you that. If you talk with them and give them some examples, they should be able to tell you. There are also some tools online that you can use. There's some good resources at www.learningstylesonline.com, and we'll post that link on the TalentGuard blog afterwards. It's a good site that I would recommend. There's some solid information there about the different learning styles and different techniques you can use for each. And there's also a free assessment tool that you can have employees take. So once you know a person's most effective learning style, then you can look for resources and techniques that align with their style in the areas of their gaps that you've already identified. How can we retain top performers when there is little room for advancement? This is a big issue. I get asked this question a lot, and it is a tough one. First, I'd say make sure that you're not just defining advancement in terms of people moving into management roles. Not everyone can be a manager and not everyone should be a manager, but many people can advance technically. So think about developing a technical career ladder, if you don't already have one, in addition to a managerial ladder, so people can see the opportunities for technical growth. Then, quite simply, ask your top performers what will retain them. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with managers who are afraid of losing people. And typically, they're asking me about how to justify big raises for them. And you know, it isn't always about the money, folks. And your staff can understand what's going on in the economy, and they can understand the position of your organization if you aren't able to give big raises, or if it's simply not appropriate to give big raises. So ask your employees openly and directly. Tell them how much you value them, that you want to keep them, and simply ask them what you can do to help keep them on board. They'll tell you. I remember asking one employee once, and he said, "Leave me alone. Let me close my door and do my work. I just want to do the work that I like by myself." And you know, that was okay because he didn't work with customers, and he didn't need to come out of his office. Yet I have been trying to develop him by turning him into a proactive team member on projects. And I learned from talking to him that I needed to stop that. I could just give him the assignments from the team, and he'd be fine. And he was. He was happy, and he wasn't pained by having to try to become this, quote, team player, when that was the last thing he wanted to be. So remember that you don't have to try to be a mind reader and try to figure everyone out on your own. You can just simply talk to your people openly and honestly. That is the end of the employee development section. From the questions that were pre-submitted, as Linda said, feel free to type new questions that you have into the chat area, and we will address those at the end. And now I'm going to turn it over to Linda to talk about career pathing.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And the topic that we are going to start with for this particular slide is career pathing. And career pathing is a huge topic, and there's there's so many different ways to do it. I'm going to try to get through all of the questions that you've asked here. Of course, feel free to call me, as you know, to ask me more questions if I don't touch on something that's specific to you. So the first question, is there a workable way to develop career paths internally in a large organization with many job descriptions? Yes, there is a workable way to do that. And there's actually a couple of ways that we have approached that in the past. So within one particular organization that we work with, they had 650 different job families or roles within, I think it was something like 45 job families. So there was a lot of roles that we had to deal with. And it was much more complex than that because they had many different business units, and those business units spanned many different countries. And even beyond that, let's say we had a business analyst in the U.S. Well, they might have had an analyst role in Canada, for example, but that role might have been a little bit different. So the first thing you have to look at when you're thinking about your career paths is you need to have a clean job family structure. So, knowing which roles belong where, understanding where the duplication is, and that's your foundation. Once you have that, then the career pathing can happen a couple of different ways. Some organizations might want to start with the hard-to-fill roles. So in another case, we were working with a medical company, and they had a really hard time filling one of their top research roles because you had to have so many different credentials and a lot of experience to get in that. It was very hard to recruit from the outside. So once they identified what the role profile was, and by role profile I'm talking about your competencies, your skills, your experiences, your preferences, and things of those nature, then we could start to look at roles within the organization that would be good feeder roles. And a feeder role is, where do we start and how does that role migrate to the next one and to the next one and so forth, so that we could start to build paths toward that. So an easy way is to start there. One of the other ways, and we did this with a retailer, is to start with your most popular roles. So what role do you hire for most often, and then which role tends to want to advance the ladder quickly. So in one organization that we worked with in a retail, that was an analyst role. So from the analyst role, what we did is we first looked at, and this kind of goes to the second question under best practice, but we took all of the analyst roles across the entire organization, and there were like 25 different ones. We consolidated them as much as possible, and then what we did is we started to show the career lattice first. So we showed everybody how you could move into the different business analyst roles within the different divisions across the different countries. So that was a first step, because there was a lot of movement at the bottom of the organization, and if they didn't have movement, there was actually a lot of turnover. So we started with the most popular role. We went across first in like roles, and then we looked at, well, what would the next role up be? And it wasn't just analyst 1 or analyst 2. We started looking at marketing and business development. And the rule of thumb was, if the competencies, this is going to go again to the next question, if the competencies are 75% overlap, then we're going to consider that the next role from the feeder. That's going to be a possibility for someone to move into. So that's another way that you can do it. And then there's the traditional role, the traditional way, which is you look at within your particular department or division or whatever you call it. Say marketing is an example. You start from marketing intern and you work your way all the way up to marketing VP. And we do it in a matrix where we would show that entire hierarchy, and then we would show how the competencies go from the bottom to the top in terms of their complexity. And then you can start to build models from there. It is really hard to track it in a spreadsheet, so we always advise that you use software because it can get a little bit unruly, but it is possible. So those are a couple of the different ways that you need to look at career pathing. I know a lot of organizations start with, they're just looking at the whole picture. You really do need to break it down and take it step by step. And we have found that employees really actually appreciate when organizations do that and not try to overwhelm them with the enterprise. So, think about what your organization's mission is and its business strategy, and then think about what career pathing strategy can you implement as a first step, as a pilot that then you can build on and supports the company's growth goals at the same time. So in terms of a best practice model for designing career paths, TalentGuard has one that we've followed, and we've been designing career paths. That's really how we originated as a company. That's how we got started, where, as I said before, once you know whether you're going to do your hard to fill, your most popular, or your traditional ladder versus your lattice, you have to start looking at how you're going to structure your job roles within the job family. So you have to think about, for each role, there has to be clearly defined competencies. Those competencies typically have levels of, from novice to expert. Then within that, you have what I'm just going to call your capabilities. Those are typically what I refer to as the experience of the role. And then you have your qualifications. So are there any certifications that are required? And then sometimes I add preferences. So is this a role that requires lots of travel? Does it require lots of flexibility, night shift, whatever that may be, so that people can start to think about that. So once you understand that structure and you have that structure across your job families, then that really builds the foundation for us to start comparing between roles. And the reason we want to compare between roles is because that's how you do gap analysis. And the gap analysis is important because that's what employees need to be aware of if they're going to develop a skill. So I would strongly advise that you look at, most people just have job descriptions. I think that's a great start. Take those job descriptions, look at your job families, and start comparing the competencies across those to see where you may be lacking in your initial base structure. And if you want visuals on this, you can actually download our Career Pathing Framework webinar we did last year, and it goes through what I've just talked about at a high level in a very step-by-step process with lots of details and lots of visuals on how to do it. Next question, how can we help employees become aware of their skill gaps? Well, if you set the foundation from which I mentioned just moments ago, having that formal job profile, if you will, you have to have that first. Once you have that, the second thing you need to have, or what managers need to be aware of, is their own employee talent profile, a LinkedIn-like profile. Because what happens and what we do at TalentGuard, and you can do this through a 360, we do it through our career pathing tool, which is a combination of assessment and career pathing. But once you have that talent profile and that role profile, whether you're doing it manually or in an automated way, there's a matching process that will happen. And the matching process is literally going to look at, so if the employee assesses themselves on the particular competencies across your entire organization and they're rating themselves on a 1 to 5 or a level 1 to 3, however you define it, because it can be custom, it's going to compare it to the minimum requirements of the role that we would set. So that in the end what happens is literally an automated red, you have a gap, yellow, you have a moderate gap, and green, you're nailing it, you don't have a gap. And for those that come up under red or yellow, you would say, here's the development option that goes along with that. Now that's a lot harder to do when you're a smaller organization or you don't use software. And what happens usually in those cases, and we've done them, I've got a couple small organizations we're doing that with, but they have a lot fewer roles, we actually train the managers on the gaps, and then we train the employees on what those career paths are and what is required in order to move up the ladder, what the gaps mean, and the approved resources. So it's a lot more intensive, but it can be done. It just really relies a lot more on teaching your managers how to become effective coaches so that they can lead those employees through the identification of the skill gap, which then migrates into the development plan. So how can we get managers to identify and help employees map the paths? Well, first and foremost, what I hear most often for complaints in organizations is that employees and managers don't understand what the career paths are. So first you need to be able to articulate and communicate your career paths. Some people do that through software. Some people do it through, we have an organization where we built these 8x8 career pathing posters, if you will. And what we did is we took 17 different employees, had been with the company for a very long period of time, and we showed their different paths throughout the entire organization. And then what we did is we assigned the competencies gained through that map, and it was a true lattice. And that was one that we did where we started with the most popular roles where they came into the organization. So you have to be able to give employees some method, we prefer visual, that helps them understand the paths that are possible. Because when they're looking at the whole universe, it's really hard for people to assess themselves, and it's really hard for managers to assess talent unless you're really skilled in that area. So that really is the first thing you need to do. And once the paths are, are visible, you can't really have career pathing unless managers know how to coach employees through it. And that really is going to be dependent on what's your philosophy for career pathing. So for example, is it possible for employees to express interest in career paths, or will they be penalized for that? If I go to a manager and say, hey, I'm interested in your role, will that get back to HR? Will that get back to my manager? If you're not setting the foundation for what is acceptable and not acceptable, employees, no matter how much they want to career path in your company, they'll be reluctant to take those steps. So a communication plan about what your organization can do is important. And then what happens is once we know what the maps are, we know the philosophy on career pathing, the managers know how to coach employees through those skill gaps, we start to explore different options. And with the tool, like I said, it's easier because employees can save many different paths and share with their manager, and they have a visual discussion and what does it mean to move from one path to the next, short term, medium term, and long term. And so that really helps improve that employee dialogue and feedback because trust starts to build. So how can you best communicate career pathing options to employees? Well, there's lots of ways to communicate the options. I just said that a while ago. You can have posters. One of the other thing we did is we did smaller PowerPoints, if you will, per role that was posted on SharePoint. You can have another thing that we've done both internally and externally, because I think that career pathing really supports recruiting, is we built up those profiles and showed how a particular individual traversed through the organization, and then people could post and ask questions. It was almost like they had some internal Facebooking type tool, and that got a lot of dialogue. We also posted those pictures to the website to show and highlight that there is mobility internally in the company. And here are a few examples in a nice visual way where people could click on it, and we had all kinds of flash that the employees could use and the recruiting team could use to then attract people to the organization, because it certainly is a competitive advantage. So those are a couple of ways. The final way is you have a tool that visually displays that. How do you determine the right career path for critical roles? That really starts with the discussion on, first you have to say, what are your critical roles? So if you know what those critical roles are in your organization, and knowing what those are, you've done the assessment. So you've talked to your managers, you've talked to employees, you've set the criteria for what makes a critical role, i.e., is it, is this role, could this role jeopardize revenue? Could it jeopardize brand? Is it a wealth builder? Those are the kinds of things you might think as critical. Your customer support might be critical. So they have to be clearly articulated first. And I talk a lot about that in the succession planning webinar that we did. So if you want to look at the process for identifying critical roles first, I would suggest you go take a look at that webinar as well under our past webinar tab. So you have to determine your critical roles, and once you have that, it goes back to the first two questions. You start looking at competency overlap in terms of your similarities and the differences of the role, and you start there. So let's just say we have one critical role. If you identify 5 or 6 feeder roles into that based on your competency overlap, that's a really good thing. It's a great start, because then you know here are the gaps, and then the thing that you need to add on to that are the actual development options. So where most companies fall down is they'll get the career path, they'll help the employees identify the gaps, but the buck stops there. We say take it a step further, and for every gap, recommend 2 or 3 development options. And those development options can be things that you have internally. It could be your own curriculum. It could be external links to YouTube. Whatever that may be, help employees figure out how to fill that gap. But that really goes back again to those first 2 questions that I answered earlier. And then how do you develop career paths when we are a flat organization? Well, that's really hard to do, but there is a such thing as a career lattice. Career pathing, most people think of is up. When I think of a career path, I think up, across, and down. So if I'm a marketing person and I want to get into sales, that's a roll over. And people forget that sometimes when people talk about advancing their career, it's really about personal growth and skill development. It's not necessarily about just managing people. So keep that in mind. In addition, what I've seen in a couple organizations is they have a huge group of people that are going to be exiting because they're up for retirement. Some of them don't want to retire full-time. So what we've done in that instance was a very specific campaign, was we showed what roles those quote-unquote baby boomers could decelerate into so that they wouldn't have to leave the organization, but these people didn't want to be in these high-stress roles anymore, but they still wanted to add value. So when you're thinking about career pathing, really truly think about your lattice, up, across, and down, and you can start making paths that span, especially in a flat. You're really going to be looking at across mostly. And ask employees, is that acceptable to you? What else can we see? Because there's no way around a flat organization. It is what it is, but that doesn't mean that employees stop learning. But again, you have to share and show that path. So I'm going to pass the reins back over to Betty so that she can talk a little bit about assessments, and then we'll finish it up with the technology discussion.
Thank you, Linda. Okay, on assessments, the first submitted question is, how do you overcome the perception that assessments are for underperformers? Well, first and foremost, make sure you're not using assessments only for underperformers, or that you're not using assessments in place of performance evaluation. I once worked with a CEO who tried to use 360 reviews to deliver negative feedback that he didn't want to give himself, that he wasn't comfortable delivering. And it didn't work. People realized that's what he was doing, and it probably made it impossible for him to use 360s in the future for good constructive reasons within that company. But I had a conversation with another CEO just last week, which was so refreshing to me. We were discussing whether or not to perform 360s for some of his senior staff, and he said that we would need to start with him first. And I was so happy to hear him say that. And that's the best advice I can give you, to have your CEO, your executive management team, your division leaders, department leaders take those same assessments first. And make sure that everyone in the organization knows people are taking those assessments, so that it becomes one of your core values, it becomes part of your culture. It's not seen as just something that is used for people who are having performance problems or issues. And talk about the assessments. Have the people who are taking them, again, I'd say start at the top, and have your leaders discuss the assessments with staff, let them know that they're taking them, even if they don't particularly care for a particular tool or they have some negative feedback to give. That's okay. It just means that everyone is exploring the assessments and using them, and it's not just a group of people with targets on their chest that are undertaking those assessments. How often are employee satisfaction surveys done, if at all, to know how satisfied employees really are? The dreaded employee survey question. I have to tell you, I have such mixed feelings about employee surveys. In an ideal situation, of course, you work to create an open environment where employees will feel comfortable providing direct and open feedback to their management. Now, I did say that would be an ideal situation. I have seen that culture in a few organizations that I've worked with, but it certainly hasn't been the case in the majority of them. The reason that I hesitate about things like blind surveys and suggestion box and other anonymous feedback is that, well, one thing, it can encourage sniping, which isn't helpful to an organization. But worse, for me anyway, you can get a comment from someone that either you don't understand or you want to sit down and discuss with the person, you want to be able to engage in a dialogue, explain the situation, and you simply don't know who made the comment. So your hands are tied. You can't address the issue. You can't engage the employee. And I would find that very frustrating because it just kind of leaves these concerns and questions in a black hole. So, I mean, you could certainly do an annual survey to get a sense of the overall satisfaction level among your employees. I'd encourage you to try other methods. I like small focus groups better. I recently worked with a CEO who was very good at this. He held small focus groups with people monthly. He met with people at all different levels of the organization. He mixed people from different departments, different levels, and he was a great listener and was very good at getting people to open up and talk to him. And people welcomed that opportunity. But his style was good for that. And not all CEOs or managers or HR people can do that. So you do need to look at the skills inside your company. If you have someone at a senior level or in an HR role who can hold those focus groups, I'd encourage that if you can. whatever you do, when you do conduct surveys, I think it's essential that you share the results back with your staff. And that doesn't mean you have to share all the details, all of the comments, or every last thing that people commented on, but at least the very basic aggregate results. If you don't share the results, people will think you're hiding something, they'll get suspicious, they'll think that the results were worse than they actually were, and you'll get the rumor mill going. I would suggest when you do a survey that first you have very clear communication about why you're conducting the survey, what your expectations are, what you hope to learn from it, that you encourage people to participate, and one way to do that is by telling them that you will share the results and that you will follow up on the results. And then when you do have the results of the survey, share them in a constructive way with employees. You can do that in small groups or large groups, but in a way where you can engage your employees in dialogue, ask them for input, make them a part of the process, ask them for suggestions on how to handle certain topics that came up, how to improve things, or how to continue momentum around things that are going very well. Sometimes it's harder when you get a good survey back to use that, but you absolutely want to highlight the good things and engage people in generating ideas for how to continue them. So I hope that gives you some thoughts there, that surveys are a touchy subject. What is the best way to collect company feedback and apply it to employees? Okay, here's a place to do a survey. Here's the survey I can get behind. Survey your customers. And there's all kinds of ways you can do this. Of course, you can use the electronic tools, focus groups, face-to-face interviews, whatever you think will work best for your customers and your organization size and your culture. But again, let your employees know you're doing it, get their input on the survey. They may have certain things they want to know about that you haven't thought about. Engage them in designing it if you can, and share the results with the employees when you get them back. And again, engage them in the process. Ask them for their input. Ask them about how to respond. Praise them on the good responses that you get and the things that they're doing well. Involving your employees in a customer survey is a great way to get employees to engage in the organization and take ownership in the success and the future of the organization. And what better source for feedback could you have than your customers? How can we get employees to follow through on development after the assessment? You see this so much in organizations where a development plan is put into place and people spend a lot of time on it, and then it gets stuck in a drawer and it's not taken out for another year, or maybe not taken out at all. I touched on this a little bit earlier. I'm going to repeat some of the things I said before, and that is first to make sure that managers have regular conversations with their staff about the follow-through, that it becomes a regular activity, a regular conversation, at least quarterly. And at those reviews, it's important to make sure that the plan is still relevant, that things haven't changed, that the employee is engaged in it, that the employee feels it's appropriate for them, and that progress is being made towards the plan. Have the manager ask their employees during these discussions how they can help them. Development should be a shared effort between the employee and the manager. It should absolutely be seen as part of the manager's role. Apologize for the background noise. I am speaking to you from the Northeast, and there are snow clouds going down the street. So I apologize if that was noisy just now. So have the managers engaged, have it be part of their work to help the employees. And again, consider making this part of your formal performance evaluation process for both the employees and their managers. And by doing that and formalizing it, you can hold both parties accountable for professional development. I hope that helps. Again, feel free to post any questions you have, And I'm now going to turn it back over to Linda to talk about talent management technology.
Great, thank you. Great, okay, talent management technology. We want to apologize. We just saw some of your comments on the sound quality, and we're not hearing it on our end, but we're going to make sure that we log in as from an independent phone next time so that we can hear any of the noise that you're hearing. And if you hear some static from me, please let us know as well, because it might be a technology headpiece issue. So in terms of talent management technology, we have just a few questions here. First question being, how can you implement technology when you have a limited budget and staff? We see this a lot, and sometimes I think the word technology can just scare people because they always think sticker shock. But what we've seen more so with the release of SaaS technology is that technology is more affordable, and you can find certain vendors like TalentGuard, for example, where you're going to pay as low as $12 per year for an employee for a certain module. Some vendors have it less, some vendors have it more. You really have to think about, what is it that you're really trying to achieve? Is technology necessary? And if it is, you might not have to start with your entire company. Start with a group so that you can test it out. You can build your value prop. You can show your ROI, and then demonstrate that it works well that way. One of the other things that we do, or that we've seen when we talk about limited staff, and we work with a lot of organizations that have 25 to 50 employees, and they typically only have one person or an office manager as their HR person. Some of the services within the talent management space can be a managed service, and what that means is, for example, if you have admin staff for your payroll. TalentGuard is one such example where we manage the service very much the same way for organizations that don't have that staff but still want to take advantage of technology. So when you're talking to vendors, ask them, what's their minimum number of users? Do they do it as a managed service? If so, how much more will that be? Because there is an additional fee for that. And then start small and then grow it over time, because CEOs definitely like to see that value is being derived from technology. How do I select the best talent management system if I have one in place? Well, the first thing you need to do is ask yourself, well, what is working with your current technology and what is not working? And then for those things that are not working, you have to determine whether they are business critical, whether they're mission critical, or they're just irritating. And if you've tried to work with the vendor to try to get feature improvements or enhancements or bug fixes, and it's not working for you, then you have to think about what is the cost to replace it. So what is the cost to replace it? What are your specific requirements? How long is it going to take? How much is it going to take in terms of time and resources to retrain people on a new system? And sometimes it can be moderate, and sometimes it can be large. It just depends on what you have in-house already. So those are just some food for thought. How can we implement a system when we need many languages supported? Traditionally, what would have to happen is you'd have to have all these language files, and development would have to get involved, and it could be a very costly value proposition. But with the release of SaaS and multi-tenant, for example, and I can only speak to how we do this, one of the things that we've done actually for a company that's worldwide was we're able to set them up as a multi-tenant, and because our text files and our product is 90% configurable, we were able to change 90% of the text in the supported language. So what happened is we came up with the English version, then they already had language specialists that they worked with. We gave them the language files, they translated them, we imported it, and then on the multi-tenant they were able to pull down the language that worked well for them and be able to run with that. So not all software vendors can do that. So that's something that when you're talking with your talent management vendor, ask them how they handle that and how they roll it out. We've done it in a way that makes it easy so that IT doesn't need to get involved because we just upload the files for you. But that might not, 90% might not be enough, so you might need a little bit more support where it's 100%. So you need to think about, what is it you're trying to achieve with the language files, and then or the language is supported. and then seek out a vendor that's going to help you with that. How do we break out of traditional paper process when everyone's comfortable with it? Yeah, we still live in a world where lots of people love technology, love paper, but we've seen a trend with the younger generation, and they don't want to use paper at all. So I'd say first and foremost, look at the demographics of your organization. If your company is going to start growing, you're going to start hiring college students and have that onboarding process, that's going to be something that could be troublesome for you in the future. But again, it goes back to, and when people are typically comfortable with something, you have to demonstrate why something else is better and show measurable value. And the way that you do that is you start small with a small pilot. What's small for you? I don't know, it could be 25, it could be 100. And you start small, but it's not about showing that you can click buttons and you get a report that looks like it has text on a paper rather than writing, for example. But what is it that you're going to get out of having an automated system? And really this boils down to the analytics. So for example, I'll be very concrete. In a performance review, when we were working with an organization and the CEO wasn't quite sure if he wanted to transfer, I said in one sentence, I'm going to be able to tell you which departments are struggling and why, what competencies across your entire organization need attention, and who is a good reviewer and who is not a good reviewer, and point those things out with a click of a button, and then show your distribution score in terms of your top performers and low performers, and then what you can do about that, and how you can track performance over time, and how it makes it easy for managers. If one employee moves from one manager to the next, all of those files are transferred with a click of a button. Rarely have you ever seen, I don't see it often, managers go back and look at a former employee's performance review. They don't, because they don't want to walk into HR and get it. So all of it there with a click of a button. But I think what's most important is really that ongoing dialogue that moves the talent management process from once a year to an everyday thing. It really fosters and facilitates the discussion between employees and managers, and that's really what I have found HR really wants to help contribute to. So again, it goes back to proving the value. Don't communicate the features, really communicate how you're going to help the managers, the executive team, and the CEO make better decisions around talent and how that affects the business. So with that, just a couple of words about TalentGuard, and if you have any questions, we'd be happy to answer those for you. TalentGuard has a full suite of products. They're SaaS-based, and we have our 360 review. We have our performance appraisal and management system. We have a very comprehensive, visually based career pathing tool. A nice succession tool that helps you plan the bench and evaluate flight risk and the ability to move people throughout the organization for critical roles. And development, this is your ongoing, what we would call, or you would call your IDP or your employee development plan, so that you can manage your development in an ongoing way, and it has your career journal, and you and your manager get to have dialogue, much like it works on Facebook. And then LearnTrack, this is really our light LMS. Really, it's about certification tracking, goes along with the qualifications. Each of these modules can be purchased independently, and then you can add on over time. But they were built from the ground up, so very easy to implement, very affordable, and we can answer more questions about that later. We have lots of customers that we've worked with on this technology. So without further ado, we're going to stand by and see if you have any questions, and if so, we're going to look at that. So one of the first questions that we see is from Chelsea. Chelsea asks, how do you encourage management to mentor employees when time and workload are continuous issues for the management team? Chelsea, what we're seeing more and more of is online mentoring versus those one-on-one traditional, 30-minute to hour sessions, and it's becoming more group-oriented. So for example, let me just give you some specifics. In our employee development plan, our tool, employees are tracking their goals, they're tracking where they want to develop skills, and they're dialoguing and posting questions for their managers and for people external to the company, and getting responses, and then those responses are being tracked over time. And we're seeing a lot more of that online mentoring community building versus the traditional, one-on-one, let me take you out and show you the ropes. So that's a trend I think is going to be something to consider as as your company and your employees continue to grow. But if you're not using technology like that, then you really have to demonstrate the value. The thing that we do first and foremost is teach managers how to be effective coaches. Once you can teach them how to be effective coaches, it eliminates or reduces, I should say, a lot of the fear that they have in mentoring employees. We did some surveys a while back in a couple of different companies, and one of the questions was, what's the number one reason you don't mentor? And it was, it was time. It was, finding the right place. It was, doing it at the right time, finding the right people to mentor. But what it really boiled down to were people were really uncomfortable with mentoring because they weren't really sure what to say and what not to say. So that could be an issue as well, and it's something that you just might want to question.